Hello, this is Janae from the Conscious Community Podcast and Conscious Community Magazine. We wanted to let you know that we have sponsorship packages available. If you are interested in sponsoring this podcast, please email Spencer at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com or call or text 630-492-0831. 630-492-0831. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate all of you. Conscious Community Podcast is brought to you by Conscious Community Magazine, America's oldest metaphysical magazine, continuously in print since 1979. We feature articles about nutrition, holistic living, yoga, healing, and much more in each monthly issue, as well as regular columns and a comprehensive events calendar and community happenings section. Welcome to the Conscious Community Podcast. This episode, we're speaking with Brent Michael Phillips, who wrote The Formula for Miracles. He's an MIT trained scientist, and we're going to ask him about his life's work, what brought him to write this book, and what he's coming up next for him. So welcome, Brent, to the show.
Oh, this is great. I'm excited to be here.
So could you tell us a little bit, you're at MIT, can you tell us a little bit about your profession?
Sure. You know, I want everyone to know right off the bat, I am the world's most unlikely healer. I never thought I'd be doing anything like this because I grew up as pretty much your typical computer nerd. I loved video games and technology and Star Wars and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, going to college was a simple choice because I wanted to go to MIT and become a great software engineer, as I saw computer programming as really my talent, my great gift to the world. And so long story short, spent a bunch of time at MIT. And you know what? At MIT, I discovered something incredible, something I never expected that totally changed my life. It's the internet. And of course, hey, that sounds kind of funny, right? Especially for those that grew up with the internet. But back in the 80s, nobody had ever heard of it. And so long story short, I found this worldwide computer network and I thought, wow, this worldwide computer network, this will change our lives. And I made that the focus of my studies. And so I graduated, I continued on in grad school at MIT. I got my master's degree and I was working on my doctorate as an expert in web-based technologies. And I worked on a lot of cool stuff, just one of the many projects I was involved with. In 1994, it was me and my group that sent the first ever live video over the web. Oh. So we were doing some really cool cutting edge stuff. And then the internet boom hit. And I was like, oh my gosh, I realized I'm here in grad school. My stipend was $950 a month, right? Living on that. And I realized that this internet boom was happening. And really, I saw it as the gold rush of my generation. So long story short, I left MIT, moved to California, and I had this grand vision. I'm like, I'm going to start an internet company. I'm going to work really hard for a couple of years. I was so driven to succeed. I would do anything. And I would sell it for millions of dollars and then maybe retire to some tropical island. And so that was my plan. And, there's an old joke that goes, how you make God laugh? You just have to tell him your plans. Yeah. So there was a lot of chuckling in heaven as I made these plans. So anyhow, things got off to a pretty good start. In the first year, I was with my startup. I did a whole bunch of high-profile websites. The very first website I ever created in my whole life was the website for the launch of the Sony PlayStation in the summer of 1995. That was my first website. I did the first website for Disneyland, the first website for Nissan Motors, a lot of great companies. We even started a whole new kind of online game based on my grad school research. But there was a problem. And the problem was I was working 80 to 100 hours every week. It was just nonstop. Because again, I was so driven to succeed. It seemed like a worthwhile sacrifice at the time. But after a couple of years of this, my body started to break down. It started with, little pains in my wrist and elbows. And then one day it hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember going out, around midnight, another late night at the office. I went to open my car and my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get my car open. And I thought, okay, all right, something's going on. So I went to the doctor because I figured, well, the doctors will know what to do, right? Well, long story short, 3 years of conventional treatment and therapy. I didn't get better. I got worse. I was in so much pain that I had to move in with my parents. I even had to have days when I had to have my mother cut my food for me. It was so bad I could only drive about 10 minutes at a time just because the act of holding a steering wheel was too painful. So I was just wiped out. I was in a lot of pain. I could barely work and I didn't know what to do. And that's when things really fell apart. That's when it really hit the fan. I went through, as they call it, the dark night of the soul, where within a very short time period, the first thing that happened was the doctors gave up on me. I didn't expect that. I had actually gone in and gotten an appointment with the head doctor at Curlin Job, which is the top physical therapy clinic here in LA, where all the Olympians and professional athletes go. And I walked in to see him, and he was there looking at my files. And I thought, thank God, right? I'm finally in with the head guy. He'll know what to do, right? And he just looks up at me and says, I'm sorry, son, but there's nothing I or any doctor can do for you. You're always going to be in pain and you'll never be able to go back to work. And I was speechless. I'm like, what? And the last thing he said before I left his office, he said, tell me, son, is there someone that can take care of you until you die? And I was 27 years old, and he put me on permanent disability and told me there was no chance I could ever recover. And that he asked me to please not come back because they didn't want to waste their scarce resources on an impossible case. So that, of course, was devastating, to be told my life was over at 27. I went and told my partners about this, one of which was my lifelong best friend. And I figured they'd be like, hey, Brent, hang in there. This is a tough spot. We'll get through it together, right? Just the opposite. When they heard I couldn't work anymore, I lost my position at the company. My lifelong best friend sold the company behind my back for millions of dollars, offered me essentially nothing. And, what I call the cherry on top of that hot fudge sundae, I also found out that my lifelong best friend had been secretly dating the woman I was crazy in love with. So it was pretty much a wipeout on all levels. I was in terrible pain, told I could never recover, never work again. I had lost my multi-million-dollar company, been taken from me. I had lost my best friend and also the woman I was crazy in love with. So it was a pretty desperate time.
What was the diagnosis?
There was a whole lot of them. I had, the general diagnosis was repetitive stress injuries to a very severe degree. And they told me I had carpal tunnel syndrome, and I had thoracic outlet syndrome, and I had bursitis and fasciitis, and I had so many itises and syndromes. I used to say I have itis syndrome.
So
that was my joke.
Had to do with like your arms and hands being able to work,
and my neck and my back. It was my whole body was all locked up. I found out many years later, we're talking like 15, 20 years later, I also had contracted Lyme disease when I was at MIT grad school. I had chronic Lyme for almost 17 years. So that was a big part of it. I was also suffering from chemical poisoning from aspartame, we call NutraSweet. So it was basically this witch's brew of toxicity and disease and bad work habits. And I was really depressed. I was unhappy. I started drinking a lot, but I was lucky. I had a friend of mine get me into positive thinking. And he said, hey, Brent, when life's really got you down, you need positive thinking. This will turn it around. And so for, almost a year, I became this gung-ho positive thinking warrior, right? I'd go to the weekend seminars and I put power words on my walls and I made a vision board and I said my mantras 108 times a day and went to masterminds and all this stuff. Long story short, it didn't really help. It cost me a lot of money I didn't have. And I kind of gave up on that. Next stop in the journey was alternative medicine. And I had another friend of mine say, hey, Brent, it's okay if the doctors gave up on you. They don't really know as much as they think anyway, and turned me on to alternative medicine. And so, again, very long story short, I spent 5 years as essentially a professional patient living on disability. All I did was go around to get different kinds of treatment. You name it, acupuncture, herbs, homeopathy, osteopathy, craniosacral work, yoga, Pilates. I did all these cleanses and special diets and had all these healing machines. You name it. It was just like my whole life for 5 years was nothing but alternative medicine. And I didn't get better. I got worse. And it was so frustrating. It all really came to the lowest point when I had a surgery that was supposed to be able to help me regain some of my lost health. And when I woke up from the surgery, my arm was paralyzed like this. I couldn't move it at all. And so that was rock bottom. And my arm was frozen for about 4 months. And that's when I was told about this lady named Terry. And she was an old friend of the family. And Terry had been very successful in finance. She was at Wharton School, MBA, made tons of money, super successful. And she almost died and found this crazy new age process involving the theta brainwave state and subconscious block clearing that saved her life. And she quit her job in finance to go be a healer. And honestly, I thought she was nuts, right? I'm like, wow, here's this lady's really gone off the deep end of the new age school, right? But I went to see her and I booked a session and I sat with her and she talked to me about the power of the mind and how we're going to access the subconscious and use the theta state. And she spent about an hour with me doing this block clearing thing. And it was all interesting, but I'm like, we're talking about God and my parents and my childhood and my best friend and all these things that happened, right? And I'm there going, what does it have to do with my arm, right? This is why I'm here. I'm not here to talk about my feelings, right? I'm here because I'm in pain and I can't move my arm. And so anyhow, at the end of the session, she says, okay, dear, don't worry about it. We'll see if we can take care of your arm now, right? And I'm just sitting across the room from her. It's all done with the mind. There's no machines, no devices, nothing you take, nothing like that. And I'm literally looking out the window, thinking about what I want to have for lunch. And she kind of goes into this healing process and her eyes roll back into her head. And about a minute later, I felt this pop in my elbow. And I was like, oh my God, I could move my arm again. And I remember Terry opened her eyes and smiled and said, well, then, that was easy, huh? And that was a huge turning point for me. If you had to ask me, hey, Brent, where was the point where the MIT engineer became a healer? That was it. And I was so amazed by what had happened. I had experienced a genuine miracle. I was so amazed at what had happened. I said to her, I'm like, Terry, I don't know what you just did, but I got to learn this. And it was then very clear my direction in life that I wanted to go figure this stuff out, figure out how it worked, and basically do what they taught me at MIT, that you go find a system, you take it apart, you figure out how it works, and then you put it back together and make it better. And that's what I wanted to do for energy healing, the law of attraction, and all these spiritual methodologies. And so, again, long story short, I thought it was going to be easy. I figured, well, heck, compared to MIT, how hard can it be to learn energy healing, right? Oh my God, I was so bad. I want everyone listening, watching to know that when I started this, I was the worst student ever. Why? I was so stuck in my mind. Too much education, too much academics, too much problem solving, right? I was so stuck in my mind, I couldn't feel or be open to energy at all. And so it was very difficult for me to learn this. And I'm saying this because I want everyone listening and watching here to know that everybody has the potential to become a master healer. It's just a matter of technology.
Interesting how you brought up how you were so academic that it was hard for you. It
was.
Brings attention to how the way we train kids in school all the way up to the university level is we're not getting the holistic person, because we have
That's right.
both types of learning we have the capability for both being intuitive and being logical. And we focus on the logical.
We've talked about this a lot with our guests, that a lot of spiritual or metaphysical or healing is on the intuitive side of things. And then you have, I always call them the engineer types. You have engineer type people over here, and everything's like a rational, logical, Boolean decision tree, X or Y binary, it's either 1 or a 0. And on the intuitive side, sometimes it's just a feeling. Like there isn't, like if you're painting a painting, there isn't a right way to paint that painting. There may be some techniques that work better than others, or, there's a rational side to it, but a lot of it just kind of flows out of you. It's in that flow state. And I think that sometimes our society values the rational, logical, engineering, analytical, like you said it yourself, your friend who worked in finance, leaving the world of finance to go do something else is insanity, because that's success. That's what defines success. And I myself, I worked 100-hour weeks for several years, and I was almost 300 pounds, and I felt like I was going to have a stroke every day, and I was really sick and really unhealthy and really unhappy, and I was sitting at a desk and, getting carpal tunnel syndrome, all the same things you're describing. And I really the way I, healed myself was just to kind of restore some balance to my life. I still have to sit down at a laptop and do some typing now and again, but I work until I'm done working, and then I go for a walk or something, do something else, and that all this go, rational, analytical, 120-hour weeks, and you never see your family, you never see your house, you spend your entire life either commuting to work or at work. It's killing people. That's, we wonder why we have an obesity epidemic or whatnot. That's because we don't have any kind of balance with the other side of things.
Sure. And, what I found was on my journey, I basically spent about 10 years doing research, going around all these amazing people, master healers, intuitives, gurus, spiritual teachers, and trying to figure out what they were doing. And this is what I found. That there's a lot of people out there that have some incredible talent that can do some pretty wonderful things. There really are. However, for almost all of them, it's some natural gift they had. It's something they were born with, and they don't understand what it is or how it works. The problem with that is that's not very teachable, is it? It would be like if you're 7 feet tall, it's easier for you to dunk a basketball, isn't it? Very easy. How could you teach someone who's 5 foot tall? You couldn't. And so that's what I ran into. And because I didn't have that natural talent, I had to do it a more difficult way. And so what I did was I applied all that learning and knowledge from MIT, and I used it to reverse engineer the processes. And this is why it was a slow process. It took me 10 years. And I spent well over $250,000 going to all these different places to learn what I could from some incredible people with amazing talents. And what I found was there is a technology to this. There is a code underneath. And so you mentioned that certainly our mainstream society has gotten far too rational and skipped over the intuitive, and it causes problems. So I found the exact opposite in the world of New Age study and self-improvement.
Yeah.
It's become so intuitive, so feminine, it's lost all the structure and coherence.
Yeah, well, I think there's a societal stigma for men pursuing these things, that you're supposed to be macho and you're supposed to suck it up and go to work and take a Vicodin and just power through your day if your back hurts. Yep. But so women have been allowed to investigate intuitive and healing and body work and all this other stuff because it doesn't, clash with the gender roles that our hyper masculine society gives us. The other thing is that, you mentioned being born naturally intuitive. The phrase when we were talking about this interview that popped into my mind is the quote, and I'm going to forget who the original person was that said it, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
That's Clark.
The healing traditions, and they come from all over the world. You have shamanic traditions and Kabbalah and yoga and all that, and this is something we've said time and again on our show, that it is insanely Eurocentric and Western-centric and contemporary era-centric to think that people 6,000 years ago were idiots.
That's correct.
We had everything figured out.
It's actually the exact opposite. All wrong. People that lived 6,000 years ago were far smarter than us.
Yeah.
Because the idiots all died. It was that simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you were an idiot, you died.
Yeah.
An animal killed you.
Yeah.
Or
Now
you got a disease.
Yeah.
Right. Now we have technology that will preserve us even no matter how idiotic we are, right?
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do was something I hadn't seen anywhere else. I wanted to see if I could find the best of both worlds. And so I wanted to go find the code by reverse engineering these masters. And it took me 10 years, but I found it. And really, that's what the Formula for Miracles is about. It's giving everyone a very simple step-by-step process that everyone can use to develop this capacity. Because as an example, I want to emphasize this is all technology. And many different peoples in different parts of history in the world have each figured out a piece of it. Have all these different wonderful traditions that all have a piece of it.
Well, yeah, we've talked about that a lot.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme.
Yes,
Rabbi Rami calls it perennial wisdom. And he didn't come, but he's the first person I heard use that phrase, where you've got these things that they're put into like a spiritual context, which is just the language or whatever culture they came from. Like they call it chi or what's the prana or whatever.
Chi, prana, ki, life force.
Yeah, like you have these, and our Western analytical, everything that's post-enlightenment is valid and nothing that came before is like, well, we don't have a rational, engineering term for that. So it's woo-woo nonsense. And really, like, they're just describing the same things because they discovered the same kind of things in their time. And they used the language, like you had Native Americans who used, metaphors about animals and stuff like that to describe the same things.
Because that's what they saw around them. That was their context. And so what I've wanted to do is advance the technology here. Because, if we look at technology, it can do some amazing things. If you ask somebody from 500 years ago, how long does it take to cross the Atlantic Ocean? You would say, well, it's going to take at least 3 weeks in a sailing ship. Mm-hmm. And you're going to need an incredible amount of wealth and, hundreds of people to crew that ship. Today, you can cross the Atlantic Ocean in a matter of hours in a jetliner. All you got to do is go to the airport, throw down your credit card, right? To take it even further, the space station, I think, orbits the Earth like every 20 minutes. So it takes a matter of minutes to cross the Atlantic. And so what's the difference? It's technology. And when I learned healing, it was really hard because it was so obfuscated. There was so much woo-woo and nonsense and all this feel-good stuff. It made it very difficult to learn. As just
people do that on purpose because they're trying to guard the secrets for themselves.
I think largely that's just how they learned it, so that's how they do
it. I almost like kind of picked up on this, and this is my intuitive side talking. Like, how like in the 19th century, anything to do with the Orient was like inscrutable and mysterious. Mm-hmm. Like I almost kind of felt like it was like that. Like we think it's supposed to be complicated because we've kind of been culturated to think that it's really like arcane and mysterious, but actually, like we had this guest on last time who does these children's books, and I'm like, actually, out of all the New Age books we've talked about, I really like these the most because you talked about breathing and you did it in 150 words.
Sure, very
it's
simple.
not that complicated, and a child can understand it. So, like,
Right.
writing a 600-page book that like makes it harder than it has to be seems counterproductive. If you want,
It does, and so there's reasons for that. But I wanted to break that pattern. Just as a point of reference, when I learned healings, it took me multiple weekend seminars and a few months of practice before I had a successful healing. So, it didn't seem like too bad at the time. I'm like, hey, that only took 3 months and you're like $8,000, right? When I teach people at my weekend intensives, everybody's doing healings within the first hour or two, and most of them get results.
I have a question.
We've turned 3 months into an hour. And again, that's just technology. Question?
Yeah, my question was related to technology.
Uh-huh.
Since you were talking about how that accelerates things, what do you think about the role of internet, AI, and the singularity, and how that would affect this type of healing and this type of
You know what? I think this will be one of the last things touched by AI.
Okay.
Because there is a fundamentally intuitive aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I have turned healing as much as one can into a by the numbers process.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that's just the foundation. And so most people would think that becoming a master healer is sort of the end of the journey. It's not. In the old days, it may take you 10, 20, 30 years to get there. For me, it took 7 years. 7 years full time doing nothing but that. Well over, $300,000-$400,000 spent. And I got certified as a master healer. And I thought, hey, that's not bad. That only took 7 years of my life full time, right? I have my students now doing it in as little as 3 weeks, 6 months on average. That's pretty amazing, huh? Why? It's just technology. You have better technology, it's faster, easier, more powerful. You have better technology, it's faster, easier, more powerful. But developing that metaphysical skill to clear blocks, to do healings, honestly, that's just the entry point. That's just the foundation. It's what we used to think was sort of the end of the journey, right? It's actually not. And, I don't want to get too deep into the more esoteric aspects of the work, but that led me to what we call awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny that after being a healer for 10 years, I realized that I hadn't actually progressed spiritually at all. And the experience of awakening completely transformed me and started to really deliver what I'd been looking for all along.
Just talking about the idea of awakening, we talked to J.P. Sears, and he made a great point about that it's not just it doesn't just magically happen. It keeps going.
Right, it keeps going, absolutely.
You keep waking up to deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper layers.
Yeah. And I want to emphasize, when I say awakening, I'm not talking about learning how to do healings or being open to new age thought. That's its own awakening sense.
Yeah.
That's important.
Like that's one of the first layers, and then
right. That's one of the first layers, but it goes much, much deeper. That's right. And my goal is to advance this technology of teaching, learning, and practicing to make the journey a lot easier, so a lot more people can do it. I mean, after all, if you had to get on a sailing ship to go to Asia or Europe, you'd do it a lot less, wouldn't you?
I listened to a lot of material about AI and consciousness, and I kind of stumbled into studying AI before I started doing the podcast, because not to go totally off on a tangent, but I'm always trying to think about like what my job's going to be and how the career field is changing. And like I came to the conclusion about 3 years ago that one of the few jobs remaining in the next 10 years is going to be working in AI, because AI is busily automating everything else, AI and robotics. And so I started, and I kind of discovered the new age thing backwards, because I was already thinking about consciousness, and then I started looking out there for what other people had talked about consciousness, and I was like, oh well, there's this entire, like, I never really thought much about philosophy or metaphysics until I was coming from the computer science. Like, okay, well, what have other people done studying consciousness? So I went to that and started thinking about consciousness and how the ancient Greeks talked about it and everything else. And one of the conclusions, and this is just my intuition, but one of my intuitions is that you've got machine learning, deep learning systems that are binary. They're incredibly complex. You got Watson; they can do some pretty astounding things, but they're not conscious.
Right.
They may be able to do what a human being used to need a human being, but Watson is not self-aware. And to me, I think that the line between that kind of machine learning and a generalized AI that's a sentient being is that intuitive side. That you've got the digital microprocessor, and you can build them faster and faster and faster and faster, but it's never going to be self-aware until it's got whatever mechanism it needs on the other side of the brain to intuit.
There will always be a place for biology.
Yeah.
You know, if we look at baseball's been taken over by all the statistics and analytics computers. But guess what? It's still played by people, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those people have to be born, they have to be raised, they have to be fed. So no matter how many statistics you feed into your computer, it will never make a baseball player, will it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I see the role of AI being. It will become larger and larger. You know, I have a nephew who's turned 18, and I was glad to hear that he wanted to learn to become a diesel mechanic, because I'm like, you know what? People that maintain and repair machines, they'll have jobs for quite some time, right?
Her dad's a diesel mechanic.
Yeah. You know, he was thinking about being a truck driver, which I thought was a bad choice only because that's likely to get automated.
Yes, exactly. My dad's
Right?
actually had that conversation with
There will be, we don't know if it'll be 5, 10, 20, 30 years. It's just a matter of time. We will have robo trucks on the highways.
Yeah. And we will have robo mechanics.
We will, but that I think is a lot
Robo-mechanic
further
is a
down
lot
the road.
harder
Yes,
than a robo truck driver.
that's right. Hard to see too far down the road, but yes, I think that's right. And in terms of the healing arts, you know, my goal is simple: that I want to give everyone the best of both worlds. I want to clear away all the clutter and nonsense and all that that's made healing and esoteric study difficult, to give people just what works. You know, there is a code to it, there is a formula to it, and when you learn it, people can do incredible things very quickly. Just in 1 weekend of training with me, everyone learns how to be a healer. You will be giving healings on the very first day. Many people open up their abilities to see energy and aura with their open eyes. Again, 1 weekend. Everyone's able to clear subconscious blocks, to access a theta state, which is key for all this, to clear energy cords and hooks. There's a whole list of things that, with the right technology, it's very simple.
Wanted to ask you, since before you mentioned the theta state, for people who don't know what that is, can you explain?
Sure. The brain has different states it can be in. The waking state, what we call the normal place, is what we call the beta state. An alpha state is a slower meditative state. And theta only happens normally when you're sleeping. And part of the key to having great results from these things is to learn how to cultivate a theta state when you're awake and conscious. That's when the healing and intuition really opens up and becomes far more powerful. And it's one of the secrets to getting powerful healings. And I do call it a formula for miracles, because that's what it is. And there's a lot of people that can claim some success with miracles, and they may have 1 or 2 or 5 or 7 testimonials or case studies. I have well over 1,000, and it's not just me, it's also my students. So you put together me as well as my students, there have been, I don't know, at least 5,000 miracles happening out there.
Have you been bringing this into a lab setting and trying to generate?
You know, I would love to. The challenge with that is, because I'm very familiar with that world, it takes an enormous amount of money to make that happen. And right now, there's almost nobody I'm aware of that's willing to fund that.
I really wish that did happen.
Yeah.
For example, I'm a musician and I teach music, and I really would like the idea of bringing what is considered healing music, because they used to actually do it at UCLA. They had it in the Roll Music Department. They were doing investigation with medical students to figure out what was going on with certain medicine songs and how this sort of thing works, because something happens. We want to know what that is. I want to know what that is.
Like if you look into something that's woo-woo nonsense and in a lab setting and it's nonsense, then it's nonsense. But not looking into it because it's woo-woo nonsense isn't a scientific edit.
You know, back in the 60s and 70s, our government started a remote viewing program.
Yeah.
Well, why was that? Because the Soviet Union had a remote viewing program.
There was a lot of legitimate research going on in the 50s and 60s, and my understanding of the history is it was considered disruptive to the established social order, which at that time was predominantly Christian, and they had their own like religious views, and they thought this was going to disrupt, you know, the order of things.
Right, tear apart the fabric of society.
Shut it all down. You know, they banned hallucinogen research, and they shut down everything that was like woo woo. And there was 40 years of you know just mocking it if you even brought it up. And so now I'm like, I stand back and say, I'm not saying what is real and what is not real, but I think that we should bring the instruments of science to bear on this stuff.
It would be wonderful. The challenge is that the ones that have all the money to do this are the pharmaceutical companies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're never going to research this because this would cut into their profits.
Yeah.
If people could learn to heal and manage a lot of their diseases and pain without needing expensive pharmaceuticals, well, then their bonus might get a little bit smaller. We can't have that.
It is interesting. You are starting to see some legitimate research. We saw at Fermilab, we saw a speaker from Northwestern who is basically, she's hooking up network of electrodes to the human brain
Mhm.
and then playing sound into the ears and recording the brain waves and then taking those brain waves and playing them back. And the brain waves are, when you convert the waveform to an audio waveform, it is the sound you're hearing, which is really fascinating to me because that, you flip right around the other way, you could hypothetically have a device, on here that you could like think sounds or think actions, like in terms of like direct neural interface for like machine control or driving.
And there is fascinating research, but very little is being done in this country.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's being done in Germany. There's a lot that's being done in Russia. There's even some really interesting stuff happening in Israel.
Well,
So it is happening, but it's not happening here.
Well, that's, at the end of the day, like hopefully it is happening in other besides medical departments. You've got neuroscience, you've got departments that aren't necessarily tied to like the pharmaceutical industry.
And in China, they have hospitals where one wing does acupuncture and herbs, and the next wing does surgery.
Yeah, that's because
and they all work together.
Yeah, that's what we need here. We need more.
I agree.
Holistic care.
Or like what is the serpent in the rainbow? Like that you have that was 30 years ago. People were actively going down to South and Central America and looking for shamans in the jungle who had plant medicines, and then bringing those back to use to study in the lab. So like there is a precedent for examining these things, from a rational scientific basis. And it's really ultimately, as a country, like we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't look into every possible technology, and somebody else is going to blow by us because we, want to disregard it. That just doesn't make sense to me.
And fascinating that so many of us, like you said, have been conditioned to think that healing and mysticism and the esoteric are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's just a sales job. With the technology I've discovered and developed, it's so easy, it's ridiculous. That I guarantee anyone that learns how to do it, you'll be underwhelmed because it's so easy. Imagine if you walked through a time portal from 500 years ago and got onto a jetliner and you flew across the Atlantic and got off, and it's like been 4 hours.
That's magic.
You'd be amazed. It's just like, how is that even possible? You'd be like, where's the rest of the journey, right? That's what I want to do for people, because I want to make it easier to get everyone to the more advanced levels a lot faster. It took me 10 years just to get through kind of the first layer of this stuff. I want to do that for people in a few months because the world needs this. It's that simple. That if we look around at all the problems in the world, we don't need to talk about that, right? We're all aware of them. Ultimately, they are spiritual problems.
Oh, yes.
And I know a lot of people don't see it that way, but ultimately, every problem we have in this world is a spiritual problem.
I think that's might be because we don't have the proper definition of spiritual. Because I remember reading this book by the psychologist, Dr. Martin Seligman, and he talks about to be healthy, you have to be spiritual. But he said you didn't have to believe in God, you didn't have to be religious.
Right.
It was just this whole like way of seeing a unified universe, really.
Sure. Some will talk about the quantum field or consciousness or the flow state. They're all the same thing.
I have a lot of friends who are in the sciences, not necessarily scientists, but in computer science or programming or very rational, I call them the engineer types.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them grew up in very strictly religious households. And a lot of them became scientists and went the other direction because they had such a negative experience in that really strict religious upbringing. Sure. And they go all the way to the other side, and then the stuff that they would really need to bring balance to their life, they aren't willing to examine because that's reminding them of their very religious.
In psychology, they call that reaction formation.
Yeah, and that's also
understandable.
They're like we were saying, it's a spiritual problem, and they don't want.
It's a spiritual problem, but to them, spiritual means, oh my God, I have to spend every Sunday in church, and my grandma smells funny, and it was boring, and like they don't want to. They've got a negative.
The reality is quite simple. That for pretty much any problem you can name, there is already a solution that has been developed.
Yep.
There's a lot of incredibly innovative, brilliant, creative people in this world. And so every problem you can name, there is a solution that already exists. The only reason we haven't applied them is our spiritual dilemma. Mm-hmm. That we don't know what we are. We don't know what God is. We don't know how life works. And we think we do. And we're causing a lot of problems. It's kind of like when I was studying martial arts as a young man. We had a phenomenon we called green belt syndrome. And this is what it meant. When you're a white belt, you're a beginner. You know you're a beginner, right? You're not going to go out and start a fight when you're a white belt because you know you don't know anything. By the time you're a green belt a year or two later, you've learned something. You can throw some kicks and punches, break some boards. That's actually when you're most dangerous because you think you know something, but you really don't.
Mhm.
By the time you're a black belt, there's really no more risk because you know that there's never any need to go fighting to prove anything.
Yeah.
I feel that phenomenon reflects in many aspects of life.
Yes.
The people who might not quite know, who think
Right.
they know, are the most
They're
dangerous.
the most
I
dangerous.
agree.
That's where our world is right now. We think we know so much,
Mhm.
but we don't, and we're incredibly in a very dangerous place.
And to be truly scientific, you have to be willing to ask questions.
That's right. You know, I've often said that no good scientist could ever become an atheist.
Yeah.
Because how do you prove that there is no God? So
Right.
any scientist that claims to be an atheist, I laugh. I go, you don't really get science, do you?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or you don't understand what atheist means. One or the other, right?
Mhm.
That I used to be a confirmed agnostic. I was like, I don't know, and I'm sure I don't know. But then I had all these experiences, again, not just one miracle, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And that makes you wake up and say, okay, there's something going on here, right? That there is some power, some intelligence happening in the world that is beyond our ability to describe it and understand it. And our relation to that, that's the spiritual.
Mhm.
And the good news is if we can evolve the consciousness of our world sufficiently, all these problems will be solved.
Mhm.
That will be easy. And so that's why I'm here. I want to offer everybody a shortcut. And, for anybody that wants to go and spend 10 years and $250,000, I'm happy to send you a big document with all the things I did.
Mhm.
You're welcome to go retrace my steps. I don't mind. But you want to do all that in a matter of weeks for a tiny fraction of the cost and effort? Okay, that's why I'm here for. I want to make that journey so much easier for people, so much faster, so much less expensive, because we need more people on this journey. We need people who are deeper into the spiritual path because, it's pretty simple. What I call, my weekend intensive is Secrets to Higher Dimensional Living, because that's what I'm showing everybody is there are higher dimensions to our reality. That's where energy, healing, and intuition comes from. And they are governed by laws, just like the dimensions of space and time we're familiar with, just like Einstein and Newton. When you understand those laws, you can apply them.
In your
And
book,
it's pretty easy.
the Formula for Miracles, can you tell us where that's available?
Sure. You can, a couple of places you can get it. Anybody that wants to buy it off of Amazon, you're welcome to. But you can also get it totally for free. Just hop onto my website at awakeningdynamics.com. That's awakeningdynamics.com. You see a little box pop up, just put in your first name and primary email, and I will give you the first volume totally for free, as well as what I call my blueprint for higher dimensional living, as well as an invitation to one of my upcoming live webinars. Because, as much as I like to talk about this stuff, you really have to experience it to see for yourself. And so, I can sit here and make a lot of claims, like I can turn anyone into a healer in an hour or two. That's true. But you need to go experience that for yourself.
And your schedules, everything's on that website as well,
Yep.
correct?
Yeah. Just go onto the website and, I do a regular series of events. I try to get on the media, talk shows like this that are spiritually conscious as much as I can. Because again, my mission is simple. I want to give everyone a spiritual shortcut. I spent a lot of time, a lot of money, went through a lot of pain so that others don't have to. Because, I want to raise the consciousness of this world to leave a better one for my child. Pretty easy.
Is there any events going on November, December specifically?
Yeah, in first week of December, I'm doing a live Heal-a-thon event, which I do only a few times a year. And it's really pretty special. I put a lot of energy and effort into it, but it's basically a guided tour of what I call the 7 sacred secrets of higher dimensional living and interactive experiences for people. So I will entrain you into the quantum field so you can start to see energy and auras with your open eyes. I will bring someone on to do a real-time, full-speed healing demonstration to show you how you use these things to change someone's life in a matter of minutes. I will walk people through how to talk to the subconscious and give everyone an experience of this.
Is that going to be in person or is this an online?
It's done online.
Okay, online.
I try to make everything available online because if I do it in person, I will only have a handful of people that'll show up. And I don't just want to raise the consciousness of my local area. I want this to reach the whole world. And, I'd also encourage everybody as a scientist and an engineer, be a little skeptical.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Don't believe anything that I or anyone says just because they say it, but be open-minded and go have your own experience. Come see for yourself. Is what I'm saying real and true? I don't know, but come see for yourself. When you've experienced it, then there's no doubt.
Well, it's been very good talking to you. I look forward to seeing what you're doing in the future. And then we will be in communication with you and let you know when it's coming out specifically and coordinate with you as far as doing the social media thing and whatnot.
Sounds perfect.
Thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, have a
Enjoy.
nice day. Enjoy
Bye.
the LA weather.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
got a few more weeks of nice weather here.
Yeah, and then it's
Yeah.
cold.
Where are you? Where are you guys?
Chicago.
Chicago. Okay. Yeah.
It's nice
I-
today, but
I
it's
lived in
like
Chicago for a short time.
Yeah.
And
like,
oh my God, I thought the summer was worse than the winter.
Yeah, well, it's been mild for the past couple days, and it's been an okay summer. But yeah, I mean, we'll get our 2-3 weeks of cool, nice, sunny weather, and then it's right on into winter.
Yeah, and my favorite thing about Chicago was the flash thunderstorms.
Yeah,
where there's not a cloud in the sky, and you go out, and 30 minutes later, it's just dumping rain.
we had a couple of those this week. So.
yeah.
Yeah, that was always crazy. Never got used to that.
All right, have a good one.
Brent.
Awesome. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Conscious Community Podcast. If you'd like more information about sponsoring this podcast or advertising with Conscious Community Magazine, in print or online, please email me at spencer@consciouscommunitymagazine.com. That's SPENCER, or call 630-492-0831.